And welcome to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Kim Power-Stilson and Steve Shenk. Steve Shenk is the author who brings you the book and the weekly series and the conferences you've been hearing so much about. It's Not Your Fault can be found on Facebook and on steveshenk.me and itsnotyourfault.tv. Steve, this is the next part of this series. It's happening every week. People are loving it. They're excited to hear what you have to say. Today we're going to talk about something a little different.
Yeah, just a little bit. I had a thought on the way over, and it happens so seldom that I have to brag about it when that occurs. But, Kim, I got a question for you. What's the difference between a child standing in her crib crying for food, a homeless person standing on the corner with a sign that says, "Any spare change will help," maybe a single mom that's driving to the daycare to drop her kids off at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to the only job she could find, and a young executive that is so far in debt that he has to work every extra hour that he possibly can, or a salesman that has been struggling for a whole week and still hasn't gotten the one sale that will pay his rent, and let's see, maybe a construction worker that's been laid off from work and his wife is dealing with her part-time job, but it just doesn't cover all the bases. Or what about 50% of the families in the United States that have to have help with their food budgets? And roughly 50 million families that are on food stamps. What do they all have in common?
They're hungry.
Yeah, that's basically it. I don't know how many folks out there have had any training in psychology. I happened to go to the University of Minnesota for a while, which prides itself on its psychology department. But there's a fellow by the name of Maslow that they talk about. And he has a pyramid of needs. And this will make sense to pretty much everyone. Until you have your basic survival needs, food, clothing, shelter, you can't think about the more refined needs, or the more refined needs and wants, and all the way up to the spiritual development of the guru that sits on top of a mountain in Tibet and says Om or whatever. We have to deal with our survival first. And you see, the interesting thing is, Kim, that we are whole beings. We're made up of 4 parts, and they're all very important. In fact, the ones that we think are the most important are actually the least important, and the least important are the most important. But that comes down to the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, and all that kind of foolishness. But bottom line is, if we're hungry, if we don't have enough food, then we aren't going to be able to get to the mental being, which is us, to think about anything else but just survival. We can't get to the emotional level where we develop our emotions and feelings and develop who we can be, and we'll never get to the spiritual level. And so there comes an old saying that them that feeds them leads them. And we've got a lot of that going on in our country today. But the fact is that people are hurting. People are afraid. People think that they are done unto. In other words, it's kind of a victim mentality that comes out that says, I don't have any control over my existence. That baby that's in that crib can't get out of the crib, can't go and do something about being hungry. She is totally dependent on her folks being able to drag, their dad being able to drag that, that leg of the slain dragon back home for everybody to eat. That single mom has to worry most about going down and buying groceries. That salesman, where I've been, some of the listeners from before know that I'm an overnight success. It took me 30 years to get to this point. But anyway, the fact is that the salesman that hasn't been able to find the right people at the right time that want, need, and appreciate what he's got, and needs to make a sale so that he can cover the hot check he wrote for groceries so that he could get the food to put on the table for the family. The homeless person, what are they going to use that change for? I know a lot of the cynics out there say, yeah, they're just going to buy another joint, but not really, not in these times. So people are hurting, and they're afraid, and they feel like they're dependent on their boss or the company to make sure that there's still a job there. And when, we've said it before on this program, that when your neighbor's laid off, it's a recession. When you're laid off, it's a depression. But everybody sees this world caving in around them, probably more than any time ever in the history of this country, particularly even more than the Great Depression, because back during the Great Depression, what was happening was that 80% of the population had ties to the family farm, and they could still cover the basic level of Maslow's pyramid, and that's food. And so here's what we're dealing with. The fact that we feel like we're dependent. We're dependent on our jobs, we're depending on our relationships, we're dependent on pretty much a lot of things, but the extent to which you're dependent, you've all heard me say this before, the extent to which you're dependent is the extent to which you give power over yourself to that on which you depend. So if somehow that little baby, that little girl could get out of her crib and go open the fridge and get some food, then she has gained a certain degree of independence. I was sitting there. Some of you have seen the little dog that we have on the program every once in a while. She attends all of our board meetings. She actually presides because she's probably more intelligent than the rest of us that sit around the boardroom.
Lexi.
But she doesn't have any ego problems and things like that. But those of you that have pets, if you think about it, that little pup that comes up when you're having dinner, she's spoiled in my case, and so most of you probably train your dogs to stay away from the table and not beg, but she comes up and she puts her little paw on my knee, and she can smell the roast beef that we had for Sunday dinner. And just think about that little pup. She has no choices. She has no independence. When you go and get a snack out of the refrigerator and you're standing there eating, she's just looking up at you saying, I can't go and open the refrigerator. I can't go and buy a doggy snack. I have to depend on you. That baby in the crib is saying, I'm hungry, my tummy hurts, whatever. I have to depend on mom, or I have to depend on dad being able to get the groceries. And the scary thing is, in our country, we've got half of our population that has to have help in buying their groceries. That's pretty basic. So where are we going to be able to be in thinking about our dreams and our hopes and our wishes and our needs? That single mom could probably use a nice guy that comes along, and she could use a husband to help raise those kids, a dad's image in the home. But she thought she married a gem, but she got a lump of coal. It's kind of dirty and useless, And so, where is she? What level is she at? How can people reach inside and find the magnificence that's within them when we have half of our nation just struggling for survival? This was the richest country in the world that could provide the food for the entire planet 5 times over in 1959, and now we're importing 40% of our food, and we can't afford that because other countries have more of our money than we have. So you put that all together, and what have we got? We've got a country that's afraid. We've got a country that feels dependent. Well, there are 2 ways you can go with dependency. You can either get up on your hind legs and say, this is horse pucky, I'm not going to put up with this. I know that God don't create no junk, like the poster in the orphanage in New York that one time. I know I'm somebody because God don't create no junk, but the fact is that we're hurting. And how do you stop hurting? You have to discover that really every one of us is a magnificent, magnificent being, human being. And how do you do that if you can't feed your family? Or if you're struggling to get a $1 bill from a motorist that goes by because you're holding a cardboard sign that's written on with lipstick that says, any change will help. And you've got your backpack and you're trying to figure out where you're going to sleep that night. Or that little girl that's hungry. Or the many, many children that we've got. 12 million American kids are hungry. Okay? So you put it all together, and what do you got to do? First of all, you got to feed people. That's why we work with the food business. That's why we've developed some food, and this is not an advertisement for our companies. This is why we're here. The reason I wrote the book, It's Not Your Fault, is because a lot of people figure that it is their fault somehow because everybody tells them it is. The church is telling us their fault. The government tells them it's their fault. Their parents tell them that it's their fault. Everything around them says, the boss comes in and says, well, we don't need you anymore. So here's a little pink slip. And good luck. Well, what are you dependent on? Well, it must be my fault that I lost my job, that the company downsized. Everybody seems to tell me that. And yet, if it's my fault, then I ought to have some control over what happens to me. But yet I don't. Everybody else seems to set the rules. The government tells me how much tax I've got to pay on what I haven't earned. Okay, it doesn't matter whether I can afford to feed my family, but then they come in and say, well, if you don't have enough to feed your family, you sign up for food stamps and sign your life away and your independence, you see. And oddly enough, on some of the welfare programs, people don't dare go out and better their situation. They're given enough to just barely survive, but if they go out and earn some more money, then they get that cut back, and so you can't gain on it. So what you going to do? What you going to do? I don't know what you're going to do. You're going to realize that there's a book that says all of this stuff isn't your fault if you didn't intend it. Even if something happened that you were really stupid, if you look back at it and say, that was really stupid, I would never do that again. But at the time, you see, understand, nobody ever does anything intentionally stupid. Because at the time, we did what we thought was the best choice at the time. Even though in retrospect, it looked stupid, even though your folks can tell you it was stupid, the preacher can tell you it was really stupid, the government can say that was way stupid. You see, but how do we get down to the fact that here's the way things work? It wasn't stupid. Nobody ever intentionally does anything stupid. And if in retrospect you look back and say, I would never do that again, then all of a sudden it becomes not your fault. If you intentionally did something that was snotty and mean, and you look back at it and say, yeah, I would do that again, then it is your fault. But if it wasn't intentional, it wasn't your fault. Now, after the break that you're getting ready to announce, I see her do this, and I know I better shut up because it's about to have to take a break. So we're going to take a break right now. Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D?
Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault. I'm your host, Kim Power-Stilson, here with author Steve Shenk. We were talking about the reason for It's Not Your Fault and the fact that it is not your fault. Before the break, we were talking about, most people don't intend to do stupid things, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault if you did. And Steve Shenk is here to talk with us about options in your life to remind yourself that it's not your fault and there's hope.
Well, the whole idea behind what we were talking about just a little bit earlier is that people look around them and they feel like they're really done unto. And what It's Not Your Fault is about is taking back control of your life. In other words, realizing that you actually do not depend on anyone for what happens in your life. You actually are a creator. And every situation that we have is exactly what we've created for ourselves, because as you read the book, you'll find that this whole thing called mortality in life is an educational process that we set up for us to learn the things that we need to learn to become more who we are. But the whole idea behind dependency and becoming independent, if you take control of a dependency, now a lot of people are afraid out there, and what we're going to be talking about is the fact that every single fear that we have is somehow connected with a dependency. The fear that little girl in the crib has of being hungry is her dependency on her parent, and the fact that that might not be filled. But when you get back to that little dog that's begging, the little dog that is begging is saying, I can't do anything about my future. I can't control it. So if you have a snack, I'd sure like a snack too. And if you give her a little bit of a snack, that little puppy, it's the same as understanding dependency. And if we can take control of it, if she could go do something about herself, well, each one of us literally, by learning how we function, that we have a tremendous universe that is full of prosperity and abundance, and that we can tap into that, and we can take control of our destiny by deciding what we want in our life. And what the book It's Not Your Fault is ultimately going to do is it's going to explain things like to know me is to love me, relationship principles, things like I like me best when I'm with you, is what you make someone else feel so they want to be around you. Things like it's not ever your fault, but it is your responsibility. And if people will take responsibility, they can take for their lives, you can eliminate things like addiction, you can eliminate problems with finances, you can eliminate problems with relationships. And if you understand, there's something called the law of me that says everything that I do is based on how I feel about myself. And if you're depressed and worried and frightened, if you understand that there's something called gratitude. You know, Emerson and Plato. Plato was an old philosopher from way back when, and Emerson came up with the same conclusion: that for which you are grateful cannot be denied. But if you take gratitude and some of the principles, the law of me, the principles that say pure, unadulterated, unconditional love is different than what anybody understands it to be. It's not a touchy-feely thing. It just is a way of living. And approval, or seeking approval, is one of the biggest problems that people have. Forcing people to get approval is one of the biggest problems that create dependency. And essentially, enablement, when somebody is choosing to be enabled, they are becoming a victim, and they're forcing somebody else to help them, and they basically climb up the top of a cliff and say, I'm going to jump off to the enabler, and the enabler says, no, I'm going to walk away, and the enabler says, no, you're not going to walk away because I'm going to jump. Well, basically, I'm going to get more drugs, I'm going to stay drunk, I'm going to stay unemployed, I'm going to be a wife beater, I'm going to do all this nasty stuff, and they force people. So enablees, which are the people that want enablement, are basically terrorists. They use all the same tactics. But you can deal with all of those situations if you understand the principles in the book. It's Not Your Fault. We're going to be having some seminars that people can come to and learn the principles. And I'll guarantee you one thing. If you understand the principles that we're talking about in It's Not Your Fault, you will be able to take back control of your life, realize that you have absolute control. If you're the homeless person standing with that sign that says a little extra change will do, you can move from there to the point where you are in a home, have a car, have a job, have a business, become anything that you choose to be. It's your choice because you are that creator. You are that magnificent human being. If you're the young executive that's so far into debt that you have to work, you don't have any life left. You can get back your relationship, retain that family. You can get back into control of your life with finances and everything if you just understand that we are the magnificent creators of our own universe, and we have the power to become and be and have and do anything that we decide to do, because the decision and the steps that we'll be giving you in the book It's Not Your Fault and in the seminars, the decision is the creation of whatever you choose to be or have or do, and then all you have to do is to apply the principles of being grateful for that which you have, and you can eliminate depression, you can eliminate discouragement if you're grateful for everything that you have, and then you're truly grateful for that which you have decided to become and have and be. So it becomes very simple. We can take all of the fear. We say that victims have big butts. I could have, but the coach didn't like it. I could have, but my wife wouldn't let me. I could have, but the teacher didn't like me. I could have, but I was in an accident. I could have, but they put the wine coolers in my trunk. You know, all of the haves and bees. Basically what we're saying is you can become and have and be everything that you decide to be with these principles that we're going to be talking about over these next few conferences. And if you read the book and you apply the principles, you are a magnificent, lovely, perfect human being, and you can become all that you're intended to be.